For those of you just joining us on Facebook, we'll begin in about 3 minutes. So we'll look forward to beginning our Lunch and Learn program promptly at noon in about 3 minutes. Stay tuned. You have a good program ahead of you. For those of you just joining us on Facebook, we'll begin in about a minute, so stay tuned. We'll start promptly at 12 for our critical conversations, the aftermath of overturning Roe versus Wade. What does that mean for North Carolinians? We'll begin in about a minute. Stay with us. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to WomenNC's Critical Conversations, our series of lunch and learns that address critical issues of concern to North Carolinians. As you can see from the slide that's on the screen, today's event is the aftermath of overturning Roe versus Wade for North Carolinians. An important topic, one of concern to most North Carolinians. And I have with me today several distinguished experts who will talk about some of those implications. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Maria Murray Ryman. I'm Executive Director of WomenNC. WomenNC is a statewide organization whose aim is to empower the next generation to advance gender equality in North Carolina. And we envision a world free of gender discrimination. You can find more about us on our website at www.womennc.org. Before I introduce the panelists, I just wanted to say a few words about putting this conversation in a larger perspective. Reproductive rights, including the right to access abortion, are grounded in internationally recognized human rights, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and a number of other treaties that the United States to which the United States is a signatory. Where safe and legal abortion services are restricted or not fully available, a number of human rights may be at risk, including the rights to life, to health, to information, to non-discrimination and equality, to be free from cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, to privacy, to decide the number and spacing of children, to liberty, to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress, and to be free of conscience and religion. So what are we to do, we in North Carolina? And I have just a few preliminary thoughts in conversation with Harvard Law School's Erica Chenoweth. What about protesting the current state of affairs? Some people have expressed skepticism about the power of protest in protecting and securing rights. But I think this perspective is misguided. Sustained activism in support of choice and reproductive justice has led numerous states, including Massachusetts, to enshrine abortion access into law. And we're going to hear more from our panelists about what's possible to enshrine into law in North Carolina and what's not. Well, what about organizing? It seems to me the rightward swing in judicial appointments and the ascendance of anti-abortion politicians in dozens of states over the past 2 decades can be chalked up to effective organizing, mobilizing, and strategy by anti-abortion activists who have been singularly focused on overturning Roe versus Wade since 1973. If anything, what Dobbs shows us is that state-based organizing, sustained activism, and effective strategy can lead to monumental change, despite overwhelming public opposition. And here's where we come in today. For those seeking to protect women's bodily autonomy, protect access to abortion, and expand reproductive justice, here are my thought would be, we have to build a movement. I could say a lot more, but I'm not going to. I'm going to introduce our panelists and let them talk about what they think we should do, how to build movements, how to overcome the current situation that we have now. First, let me introduce Senator Valerie Foushee. North Carolina State Senator Valerie Foushee is a lifelong North Carolinian and a distinguished leader running to represent North Carolina's 4th Congressional District in Washington. Foushee was born the oldest of 6 children in a family that worked to make ends meet. Foushee was enrolled in segregated schooling until the 6th grade, and after volunteering in her own children's classrooms, she realized that kids, especially Black and brown kids in her community, needed an advocate. So she ran for school board and won, and has since dedicated her career to public service. Over the next 24 years, she became the first African-American woman elected to the Orange County Board of Commissioners and went on to serve in the North Carolina General Assembly. Foushee is married to her high school sweetheart, Stan, with whom she has 2 sons and 1 grandson. And Senator Foushee is joining us from Washington. We so appreciate your being here, Senator Foushee. Thank you. Next on our panel is Sarah Preston. Sarah joined Lillian's List after almost a decade as policy director at the American Civil Liberties Union. Sarah now serves as the executive director for Lillian's List, and she has since 2016. Her goal is to expand candidate recruitment and training. They offer training to potential candidates, and she has doubled the number of trained potential pro-choice progressive women's candidates. Lillian's List has impacted many. Her experience interning for the only female member of the Democratic Senate caucus in Iowa cemented her commitment to promoting women in leadership positions and politics, and North Carolina is the beneficiary of that experience. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. Next, we have Joe Nicholas. Joe was born and raised in Rayford, North Carolina, and graduated from ECU with a BS in elementary education, and then received her master's in education administration from Loyola University in Baltimore. Joe worked as a teacher for many years, but retired as an elementary school principal. Throughout her tenure, Joe was an advocate for all children in making sure that they had the best education they could achieve. She also worked for the rights of all educators. Joe was involved with contract negotiations, marches, and assisting other administrators with their concerns. When she retired in 2003, she became involved with the League of Women Voters in Moore County, North Carolina, and she was president there for 10 years. Then she moved on to the state level to become president of the League of Women Voters of North Carolina in 2011. She returned at the state level to be its president again in 2019 and continues as its president today. Working with members across the state, she has been visible in many activities involving issues that are concerning to the people of North Carolina, especially regarding voting rights and women's rights. Welcome, Joe Nicholas. Finally, we have Jillian Riley. Jillian is the Director of Public Affairs and lobbyist for Planned Parenthood of the South Atlantic. She has a master's degree in social work in community management and policy practice from UNC Chapel Hill. She has worked across the state for many years as a grassroots organizer and policy advocate on environmental, housing, and reproductive rights issues. Jillian, we are so glad that you are here. Thank you for joining us. And now let each one of our panelists say a few words about where they are, their concerns, their issues in the aftermath of the Dobbs decision for North Carolinians. And let me begin first with Senator Fushi. Senator Fushi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you all for joining us today. Well, now that the devastating Dobbs decision has come down, access to abortion, as we know, will be kicked back to the states. So in August, a federal judge reinstated a 20-week ban, making abortion after 20 weeks illegal in North Carolina. So what we know is that abortions after 20 weeks are extremely rare and typically occur as a result of a threat to the life of the mother or the fetus no longer being viable. This 20-week ban could therefore endanger the lives of women across the state. North Carolina still has the least restrictive abortion laws in the South. And I guess approximately 30% or roughly 30% of abortions performed in North Carolina are coming from women from surrounding states where there's a total ban or more restrictive bans on abortion. So with that decision being kicked back to the states, the North Carolina General Assembly will decide the future access to abortion in this state. Many of our Republican colleagues in both the House and the Senate have already expressed a desire to take up even further restrictions next year, which is why it is so critical that as Democrats, we hold enough seats in at least one chamber to sustain Governor Cooper's veto. We know that Republicans hold a majority in both chambers, and they can pass any legislation that they wish, even without our votes. But what happens then, of course, is that those passed bills go to the governor's desk. And if he vetoes that bill, it comes back to the General Assembly, where as long as we have enough votes needed to sustain the veto, we can keep that bill from becoming law. What we also know in the past is that Republicans have already passed 2 bills relating to restricting a woman's access to reproductive health care since we broke the supermajority in 2018. But since then, we were able to sustain Governor Cooper's veto and stop those bills from becoming law. And so in order for us to be able to keep this ability, we must have at least 21 Democrats in the Senate, and we currently have 22. We cannot afford to lose even 2 Democrats in the Senate, or Republicans will be able to pass a total abortion ban with no exceptions. And, you know, I'll say that again, they will be able to pass a total ban with no exceptions. So it is critically important that this year, more than ever, we fight like hell at the ballot box, and we make sure that we are uplifting state legislative races. I can't stress that any more critically, that we have to make sure people understand what is at stake at the state legislative level. We are the last line of defense when it comes to keeping abortion legal in the state.
Well, you certainly put that in stark terms, Senator Fushi, and given us something to certainly think about. Sarah, why don't we have you follow Senator Fushi and talk a little bit about the concerns of Lillian's List and the work that you all are engaged in with regard to this topic. Sarah?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, so as Senator Fushi said, by overruling Roe versus Wade, the U.S. Supreme Court handed immense power back to the North Carolina General Assembly to determine whether abortion will remain legal in the state. And we have a razor-thin margin on which to operate here. If we lose, even 2 seats, we could lose the ability to sustain a veto. So North Carolina still offers more access to abortion care than most of our neighboring states. And we have become probably the closest access point for abortion care for many states throughout the South, which means that we're not just trying to protect abortion rights for North Carolinians, but also access for people throughout the Southeast who might need to access abortion. So with that in mind, Lillian's List is the only organization in North Carolina that recruits, trains, and supports women who are champions of reproductive freedom and gender equity in seeking elected office in the state. We have always centered reproductive freedom and gender equity in our work, as well as getting women specifically elected. And we focused often at the legislative level. Because of that, we actually have 25 new or competitive candidates who are running this year at the legislative level that we have endorsed, most of whom we have trained, all of whom we have vetted thoroughly to make sure that they are champions of reproductive freedom, and to try and, give us more of a call to action on what can be done here. We would really encourage you to look up those candidates and make sure that you're doing everything you can possibly do to support them. I will not stop banging the drum through Election Day. The first primary thing is to make sure you vote for pro-choice candidates. Really check their stances, because party affiliation doesn't always tell you what their stance is on reproductive freedom. There are some Democrats who are not pro-abortion or pro-choice. There are also local candidates, and I think it's important to pay attention to local elections. There are several local elections happening this year that normally would have happened last year, and they were delayed because of redistricting. And elections at every level are going to be important to us. We already have a county commission that has put forward a resolution stating support for a full abortion ban. I don't believe it's passed yet, but obviously the local electeds will get involved here as well. And they also have a role to play in protecting access through protecting local clinics. So we need to be mindful of our local elections as well. You can learn about our candidates on our website, lillianslist.org. And please consider your time and your treasure is very valuable to these candidates. You can donate to them, but you can also volunteer. And I always talk about a couple of our candidates who won elections. We have one candidate who won her election, flipped a seat back in 2018 with something like 70 votes. Every vote counts, but every door knocked also counts. We have razor-thin margins. We have several candidates running in 50-50 toss-up seats. Every door, every phone call can help these candidates turn out that vote that they need to win. And our candidates are really ramping up their field programs right now. They could use bodies, they could use volunteers. And Lillian's List actually has a day of action this Saturday that you can still join in on. We will be supporting 7 of our candidates through phone banks and door knocking all over the state. So there are opportunities to volunteer even if you're not in one of the districts where a competitive candidate is running. And of course, I would not be representing Lillian's List well if I did not say, if you are a woman, if you are progressive, if you support reproductive freedom and gender equity, consider running for office. We truly believe that with an issue like reproductive freedom and abortion, specifically, women really need to be at the table when laws are being considered that affect these rights. And unfortunately, North Carolina has never gotten much above 25% representation of women in office. We've scored poorly on women's participation in politics in the last few report cards that have been put out. And we still have close to 2/3 of our county commissions where there are none or only one woman serving at that level. I know it isn't an easy task. We fully understand why and how it is difficult for women to run and to serve. That's why we exist. But truly consider it. And I always tell women to be opportunistic about it. Look for local offices, look for places where there are open seats, really evaluate your candidates to see if there's somebody that you agree with. You don't need to run against them. You can help them out. But if there are people that you disagree with serving at the local or legislative level, you can consider running and you can become part of the body that makes these decisions. And you can start preparing now for a run for office. You can start networking. You can come to a Lillian's List training. We have one happening on Thursday, in fact. Get involved in your precinct or local party and look for that open office to run for. That is how we have been able to build a bench of women that are ready to run at a higher level. They've had experience like Senator Foushee at the local level, the school board, the county commission, and then move on to the Senate. And now we all are cheering her on in her run for Congress as well. So we really hope that, that women are all over the state are thinking about how they can engage in this way as well, running for office.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that you're underscoring Senator Fouchee's point about the importance of voting and then giving us yet another way. I think probably many people on this call have not considered running for elected office. And we have, at least Senator Foushee here who's done so. And you're letting our audience know that you don't have to do it alone if you're even thinking about it, that there is this organization in North Carolina one of whose main purposes is to, in fact, work with women who are interested in running. So I think that's, it puts a smile on my face, and I hope it does for our audience too. The Dobbs decision is sobering at best, and one of the things we're here to do is to say, don't cry, do something. And now let's hear from Joe Nicholas of the League of Women Voters, who will have give us some more ideas about, I suppose, what is to be done. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The League of Women Voters was founded over 102 years ago because women didn't have any rights back in those days. And as the saying goes that we've all heard, we've come a long way, baby, but we're not finished. We are a nonpartisan organization of women and men fighting for safe voting rights, women's rights for all people. We educate the communities on issues that seem partisan. However, we explain both sides of the issues so the voter can make the best decision for themselves. The League of Women Voters of North Carolina is a strong organization of volunteers, women and men who believe in their communities and want to reach out to them regarding fair elections, education, women's rights, environment, and other issues affecting our voters. We have strong action teams on each of these issues that keep us abreast of all the things that are coming down the pipe. We were instrumental to make sure the State Board of Election established a ballot track system where voters could track their ballots after they voted. You wouldn't believe, but in the primary of 2019, there were over 200,000 votes not counted because of something wrong with the absentee ballots. It could have been the signatures on the ballots. It could have been not having a person to verify that they were there. And I don't know about you, but my signature changes every single day. We have created for people and for our communities many tools using the fabulous YouTube where citizens can see how to get an absentee ballot or what happens to your ballot once you have voted. We also promote our Vote 411 online voter guide that gives you all the information that you need regarding candidates that are running on the ballot, where you can go and vote, and anything else you need. We are committed to empowering voters and defend our democracy. With the Roe versus Wade decision being at the federal level, our national organization, the League of Women Voters, stood up and counted and said, that the ruling stripped women and those who may become pregnant of their bodily autonomy, and it was devastating. The League of Women Voters stands in our power with reproductive partners like yourselves and our persons who fear the dangerous consequences of this decision. We will use our anger to fight in the legislatures, in the courts, and in the streets. We call on our elected leaders at the state and federal levels to act swiftly to restore bodily autonomy to all people. Women hold the power to create a more perfect democracy. We will not stand by as constitutional rights are stripped away, one by one. Women's rights are humans' rights, and we will continue to fight until the right to abortion is restored. Our lives depended on it. Therefore, the League of Women Voters National filed an amicus brief in the case against Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, and we are continuing to fight beside of our partners. And thank you, Valerie, for being there for us.
Thank you so much, Joe. Just a word that I want to note. Joe was quite clear that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, and yet holds at the national level as well as the state level a belief that the Dobbs decision was wrongly decided and that it threatens all women, no matter what their party affiliation, no matter what their political leanings. And I think that's important to underscore, that this decision, that the right to access abortion services is not necessarily partisan. And that's what Sarah also suggested in her comments. Just because someone's a Democrat doesn't necessarily mean that she has a pro-choice stance, and the opposite could be true as well. And so one of the things that the League of Women Voters offers, as well as Lillian's List, is a guide to those people, Democrats and Republicans, progressive and not, who support women's right to choose and the right to abortion access and services. So I think that, to me, is something really to underscore, that this is, and that's why I talked about human rights, and Joe did as well. This is a human rights issue. It transcends political party affiliations. So thank you for that, Joe. Appreciate that. And
Thank you, Maria.
Certainly not least, we have Jillian Riley from Planned Parenthood, who's going to also set the stage for us at times in a larger context and explain how the Dobbs decision affects North Carolinians, given the scattered nature now of abortion access and rights throughout the country. Jillian?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all so much for having us today. I'm very excited to be with this group of women and longtime advocates for abortion rights and access. So let's kind of back up and talk a little bit about the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization case. I think a lot of people are still really trying to unfold and discover exactly how this happened, why this happened. And so let's get into it. So Mississippi passed a 15-week abortion ban. This was during when Roe v. Wade was still a constitutional right across the US. And so this 15-week ban was unconstitutional. And the Jackson Women's Health Organization was the last abortion provider in the state of Mississippi for over a decade. So the Jackson Women's Health Organization, represented by the Center for Reproductive Rights, sued over this 15-week abortion ban in the state of Mississippi, and it made its way up to the US Supreme Court. The state of Mississippi directly asked the US court to overthrow Roe v. Wade, and that is what the court ruled, overthrowing and overturning Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And what we saw in the decision was that the Supreme Court, the majority ruling of the Supreme Court, gave the power back to state legislatures in order to make the decision over abortion bans and restrictions. But it's important to note that it wasn't just the state of Mississippi that was introducing unconstitutional bans and restrictions on abortion. And most notably and most recently was the 6-week ban in Texas. And so that bill was introduced and passed in the attempt to, if the Dobbs case, for whatever reason, did not officially overturn Roe v. Wade or did not make its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, that bill would be the next in line, possibly, to make it up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Texas wasn't the only state doing this. And so I want to be clear that it was a coordinated effort across the US in the anti-abortion movement to introduce abortion bans and restrictions in the attempt to overthrow and overturn Roe v. Wade. And so since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the 6-week ban is in effect, and we're seeing bans on abortion be passed across the US and are impacting what's happening here in North Carolina as an influx of patients are coming into this state. And we can get into that more, but I will just say North Carolina is a very critical access point for abortion. And at Planned Parenthood, we are seeing about 1/3 of our patients are coming from out of state right now. And we're seeing people from Texas, from Louisiana, from Alabama, from Tennessee, from Georgia, from South Carolina, from Florida, from West Virginia, really the entire Southeast, and even over into part of the Midwest. People are coming to North Carolina in order to access critical abortion care right now. And I'll leave it at that before we get into questions.
Sobering, sobering at best. Both you and Senator Fuschi have talked about how North Carolina right now is kind of a haven. And so it's critically important that we as North Carolinians protect that right, not just for North Carolina's citizens, but for our sisters across the Southeast, and as you said, even into the Midwest.
I'll just say this real quick. You know, we kind of hear both words, haven and access point. Those sort of phrases get thrown in, and I just want to say that, you know, abortion is legal up to after the 20th week of pregnancy in North Carolina. There are so many restrictions on the books right now. We don't even have time to deep dive into all of them, but I'll just say for one of them, we have a 72-hour mandatory waiting period. So this is one of the longest in the country. Just a few years ago, it was 24 hours. And just a few years before that, we didn't have one at all. It's a political move. It's medically arbitrary and necessary. So that is to say that, unfortunately, we're not a haven state. We have so many restrictions on the books still. Abortion access is legal, but it's not easy to access. So we like to say we're a critical access point. But unfortunately, because of all of the restrictions that have been passed over the past decade, it is certainly still difficult for North Carolinians, and especially people coming from across the region, across the US, to access the critical care that they need.
Thank you for that reminder. Those of you who've tuned into our Critical Conversations series in the past know that right before the Dobbs decision was passed, we had an entire Lunch and Learn devoted to access to abortion care, which is very different than having the right. And it's sort of the kind of distinction, I think, Jillian, that you just mentioned in your remarks. If anyone's interested in that topic and how there is completely unequal access, especially to women who are in Black and Brown communities, you can go over to our YouTube channel, WomenNC Official, and take a look at that Lunch and Learn. It was an hour-long Lunch and Learn that had representatives from organizations like Pro-Choice North Carolina, Sister Song, organizations committed to trying to equalize and make abortion care actually accessible to all North Carolinians. So thank you, Jillian, for that reminder about how we're really not a haven, and that's probably not the best word to use. We simply make it more available than some of our neighboring states do. Let me turn it over now. Well, I'm not going to turn it over. I'm going to ask a few questions, and panelists, feel free to also to join in and to rejoin the conversation. Senator Fushi, I wonder if I could pose the first question to you and ask you, is there any pending legislation in the North Carolina Senator House that addresses abortion access? Anything pending that we should know about? Our primary audience for these are North Carolinians.
Maria, thank you for the question. Currently, we are, for lack of a better word, we are not in session. We have sessions scheduled each month, 2 to 3 day session. But currently, we've not had any votes. Actually, we are the calendar. And so we are moving from month to month, determining whether there will be legislation heard. Currently, we don't have anything that we believe will be heard prior to the beginning of the next legislative term. But that's where we stand at the moment.
And in some ways, that's good news, I suppose, right? It gives
in some ways, let me just say this,
please.
Because several of our panelists have alluded to what can happen. What we know is that this has been on the anti-abortion activist agenda for quite some time. That's how we got here. And so having majorities in the legislature always presents an opportunity for that kind of legislation to pop up. We all know about the process and how we can take a bill that has passed both chambers and have that bill come back as a conference report with something dropped in it that has nothing to do with the bill that we voted out of the legislature. So I still hold in my mind that that could happen. It doesn't appear that it is currently, but I think we need to keep our eyes peeled and ears open so that we're prepared. There needs to be a movement that is greater than the movement that the anti-abortionist activists have had. I think that where we are now is we need to galvanize our folk, we need to mobilize our folk, and we need to realize that we need our own movement. We need the same kind of movement that got Roe where it was. And so I think even though there's not pending legislation that we can identify at the moment, we need to always have in the back of our minds that something could drop. And those 2-day sessions that have been scheduled for every month until the end of this year, there is always a possibility, one of those calendars for either the House or the Senate, such that we'll have to come back and deal with that piece of legislation. So even though we can't say that we know that there is pending legislation, we know that there's always a possibility. I hope I answered that question with enough scare in all of us to keep all of us understanding that we have to be watching and waiting.
And let me ask you this, and I'll throw this out to you, Senator, first, but I hope that the other panelists will weigh in. Is there a way to ensure some sort of bipartisan coalition to stop the nonsense, as it were? Can we work across the aisle, knowing, as both Sarah and Joe spoke about, that not every Democrat is pro-choice and in favor of abortion access, but it does seem in large measure to come out one side versus the other. Can we work across the aisle? Is there a way to make that happen?
So many of us have been, I've been doing it. And I sad to say that there's an issue that will not move. And what we have heard, if anything, is that given the opportunity, they will do more. There does not seem to be any notion of considering that the issue of bodily autonomy is not a democratic issue. It's a women's rights issue, which makes it a human's right issue. But that has not been what has driven their insistence on a full ban on abortions. So I don't know that there's a case there. I mean, there are Republicans in the General Assembly with whom I have worked to get other legislation passed, but I've not been able, and I would submit to you that other Democrats have not been able to get the needle to move from Republicans on this issue.
Well, of course, you're in the
Which is
trenches.
not the
And so, you know, did other folks have thoughts about this?
I can add something.
Please.
So I can just say that, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, for anyone on the call, but as far as I know, in the history of abortion bills in North Carolina, the Republican Party has never once deviated from a vote. So they vote across party lines and collectively and united on every single ban and restriction on abortion. And so they're not going to deviate, as Senator Fucci has said, if their plan is to, you know, put a total ban on abortion. We expect every single anti-abortion opponent and more likely Republican representative and senator to vote in favor of that bill. We also know that Governor Cooper has openly spoken about supporting access to abortion and presumably will veto any bill and restriction on abortion as well. So we do expect it to fall across party lines. There may be a few perhaps more moderate Democrats, but I think that what the polling is telling us, and as our folks are campaigning across the state, is that abortion access is the #1 issue in North Carolina for the elections right now. And we're seeing that our endorsed candidates for Planned Parenthood Vote South Atlantic across the board are working really hard to push out that messaging. And when they're knocking on doors, you know, people are very, very interested in what they believe on abortion. And I would say the same thing is probably happening on the Republican side. We're seeing a national wave right now of Republicans backtracking on their views on abortion access, going from, you know, incredibly extreme to slightly less extreme viewpoints on access to abortion. And we're seeing that in North Carolina as well, on the Republican side. And so they're trying to figure out their messaging and what they're going to say. But at the end of the day, they're going to vote with party lines. And if that's a total ban, they will vote to ban abortion, regardless of what the voters think.
Others want to weigh in on that, on the electoral political side of this?
Just
I will.
add that it's incredibly, like, one of the things we've seen in recent polling, as Jillian mentioned, is that the enthusiasm gap between Democratic and Republican voters has basically completely closed since the Dobbs decision came down. So we had Democratic voters who were not extremely excited about this midterm election prior to this decision, and now they are. And I think one of the things that's interesting about, you know, this particular issue is that I think it's mobilized Republican voters in the past, but Democratic voters and maybe unaffiliated voters have not voted on this issue. This has maybe not been their top priority. And we've seen that switch because honestly, even though I think activists like folks at Planned Parenthood and League of Women Voters and Lillian's List have been saying for years that we could lose Roe, right? Like that Roe was in jeopardy and this was a real risk. For most people in the general public, this came as a shock. This really blindsided them. They did not anticipate this. And it wasn't until the leaked decision or opinion on Dobbs came down in May, it was leaked, a draft of the opinion was leaked in May, that people started to realize this might actually really happen. And then of course it did in June. And I think that was a wake-up call, and it's really energized both unaffiliated and swing voters as well as Democrats to engage in this election with the understanding that this is about abortion, but it's also about a lot of other rights, you know, that are at risk. and that, frankly, the opinions in Dobbs named some of those things. And, we can talk about the ones that are maybe not that much of a reach, like contraception, but also things like marriage equality, that are really at risk because they're rooted in the same legal arguments as Roe was rooted. So we've got a lot of things at risk that we really need to be working hard to see that they are codified. And I will just mention, it's completely correct that I think, given the makeup of the legislature this moment, the most likely thing we would see move is some kind of anti-abortion legislation. But many of our featured candidates, former featured candidates from the Lean's list, including, I believe, Senator Fushi, did introduce legislation to try to codify Roe. And that is, it's in the legislature. It's something they could consider. And it's certainly something that people could, call their legislators about and advocate for, because one of the things that we should be focused on isn't just protecting, the legal right to abortion up to 20 weeks, but also how are we going to, if we were to regain the majority, how are we going to expand access? How are we going to codify protections so that, people in North Carolina and throughout the Southeast, where it's even more hostile than North Carolina, can access abortion here, can actually access it, not just it's legal, but it's accessible.
And I take it my reference to Massachusetts, one of the models perhaps for a more proactive state stance in North Carolina might be what happened in Massachusetts, where they, to my understanding, have in fact codified the right to abortion in their state constitution via legislative vote. Joe, did you want to get in here and say something? I thought I saw you trying to get in, so I'll give you the opportunity if you
I won't take much of your time. I agree with the rest of them because, we're nonpartisan, but we would love to see our legislators working together and coming across together for this important issue. And then that way we can get together. We need to also make sure that our communities understand what is happening and get a lot of information out to them.
Yeah, I think that's a theme that I've heard in the 45 minutes or so that we've been talking. I think it was Jillian, but forgive me if it wasn't, the sort of, idea that until this decision came down, except for the people who were terribly active, it was kind of a surprise, even though many people had been talking about the problem, the legal reasoning behind Roe, the probability or the possibility that it might be overturned, and then it happened. And so there is this need, it seems to me, that's one of the things we're trying to do here. For North Carolinians, what is to be done? What kind of information do you need? Who should you be voting for? And that sort of thing. And hopefully we will have both a slide at the end of this presentation, as well as on our website and our YouTube channel, links including to the League of Women Voters that do have information that will allow people to make informed decisions with real, credible information behind them.
Maria, can I add something?
Yes.
Because again, as much as we've talked about which political party has been promoting women's reproductive rights, this election presents something different from what the legislature presents. And even though we know that on this issue, legislators tend to vote with the party, but that does not have to be the case with individual voters, particularly women voters who go to the polls in November. And that's why I say that our movement has to be strong as it represents women and their rights to make choices about their bodies and their futures. And so our role, our must do, our obligation has to be messaging to women in particular, and men as well who support women, but understanding that when they go to the ballot box, it's just them, a pencil or pen, and that ballot. And because their reproductive freedom is on that ballot by virtue of who they vote for and whom they vote against, our message has to be to them to vote for their freedoms. And so we don't have to deal so much with what the party affiliation is as we talk to women voters. We need to talk to them about their freedoms.
That's a really, really important point. I think you're bringing up that it's not the same old, same old. Even if you have voted one particular way in most elections for most of your voting history,
This is different.
This is different. And you needn't stick with the same old, to the extent that you care about freedom and, as has been mentioned by me and several others, important human rights issues that are at stake. And I think, as Jillian said, also not just about reproductive freedom, but given the way the Dobbs decision was decided and Justice Thomas's implication that other seemingly enshrined rights might also be at risk, you know, to use an overused expression, canary in the coal mine, right? This limitation on women's bodily autonomy could spell further erosion, I guess, of other human rights that we come to take for granted, as we did the protections enshrined in Roe. Let me throw this question out to the panel and take it up as you will. Do you really think people are going to vote this way? I know you said you hoped, Senator Fushi, that people were going to vote based on this human rights issue. What's your thought? It's my understanding, and I am no electoral expert, that people don't often vote about these issues. They vote with their pocketbooks and with economic issues in mind. And, you know, these issues are sideline issues. Do we have any either polling or, because you've been talking to folks, have any insight into whether this really will be? It should be, as Senator Fushi said, a different election. Is it really going to be a different one? Are people going to vote based on their belief in reproductive freedom?
I'll start off. I have gotten some information, you know, the league received some information that we've had close to 30,000 more women to register to vote within our state. Where have those 30,000 women been before? But luckily they're here now because these issues are coming up. We're getting some information out to the public to let them understand this is affecting you. Why are we having men making decisions for women? That's all I'm going to say.
Wow, 30,000 voters. That's cause for, if not celebration, then at least hope, I suppose, that this indeed will be a different election. Other thoughts about how people vote and on what issues they really will vote? Any lessons from other states that might be relevant here?
Well, I think I heard Jillian mention this too, but like we've certainly been hearing from our candidates who are running polling in their districts that this is a top one, top two issue for the voters in their district, particularly for Democratic and swing voters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had one candidate who told us that protecting legal abortion is the #1 issue for swing voters, which is really important when you're running in these toss-up seats, which we have a lot. You know, gerrymandering is a whole nother lunch and learn. But what I will say is that the maps we have this year are probably the best ones, the most fair maps we have had in maybe a decade. And we have a lot of seats where essentially the voter makeup is about 50-50 Republican Democrat. So you're really looking at those swing voters or unaffiliated voters for how the election is going to turn out. So if protecting legal abortion is a top issue for unaffiliated and swing voters, that does offer some hope for progressive candidates. But I'm a little hesitant about that because we've all seen polling fail in the past. I want to say, like, it's not time to start celebrating. It's time for us to really put our foot on the gas and make sure that we are, as Joe said, educating everyone we can think of on this issue. Because one aspect that I always think about is, you know, we look at Kansas, where there was recently a ballot initiative to essentially remove constitutional protection for for abortion I believe it was in the Kansas Constitution, and it failed dramatically. Like, the voters overwhelmingly voted to protect abortion, and protect the right to abortion. And that happened very recently. I think the lesson for me, the reminder for me, which I already knew this, but sometimes it's good to have a reminder, is that actually we are the majority. People who support legal abortion are the majority. We might even be the supermajority in a lot of places. So it's not about, we don't necessarily have to go about changing everyone's mind. We just have to make sure that people are aware of what is at stake. And also, I think, aware of what restrictions already exist, right? Because some people who might consider themselves supportive of legal abortion might also support certain restrictions. But those restrictions are most likely already in our law, these 3-day waiting periods, all of the things that Republicans have frankly passed over the last decade, long scripts that doctors have to read, other regulations of the providers, all of that already exists. So if your concern is that you want it to be safe, it is very, very, very safe. If your concern is that you don't want it to be offered through telemedicine for some reason, that is already in the law here. Like, there are lots of restrictions that make it difficult to get abortion, but if you support legal abortion, then you need to get out and vote, and you need to understand that that is frankly what is at stake. And I think the majority would be with us on that, and we just need to make sure that they understand and are mobilized this year.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I want to at least start with Jillian on this one. What's the next step for in North Carolina for the anti-abortion opponents, for those who wish to further restrict what Sarah has just reminded us? And you do, Jillian, earlier in the conversation, we already have restrictions, but we have those who wish we would go further. And Senator Fushi has reminded us of that as well. What's their next steps? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I will say, first of all, I wish I had a crystal ball. That would be really helpful. But, the Republican leaders, Senator Berger and Representative Moore, have come out in the media in countless articles saying that they plan on introducing a ban on abortion in January. So we know, the election's November 8th. We have December. Come January 1, it's very, very possible we will see session reconvened with the new General Assembly, those who have been elected, and very quickly they'll be introducing a ban on abortion. I would say right now, nothing's off the table of what that ban will look like. We're seeing copycat bills all across the US right now, from total bans to 6-week bans, some 15-week bans. I imagine that we will see some type of copycat bill introduced in North Carolina. And I think the level of restriction will depend entirely on the election. If we're able to hold the votes in either the Senate or the House, we will be able to sustain Governor Cooper's veto, and the bill will be rejected. But I mean, it all comes down to the election. And I think regardless of how the election turns out, they will try to pull something and they will try to introduce a ban. So it's very, very real. We have the ability to hold the seats, and if we keep, turning out the vote, getting people, knocking on doors, getting people to the polls. But the reality is, January is the month that they have told us again and again, and I'm taking them out their word. January will be the month that they will introduce an abortion ban. And that's a very real reality for the people of North Carolina. And as we've talked about earlier, for this whole Southeast, we're seeing abortion bans across the South and the Southeast right now. So it's not just going to impact North Carolinians, but it's going to impact literally hundreds of thousands of people who will have nowhere close to go and will be forced to carry pregnancies.
Senator Fushi, I'll give you the opportunity to either add to that or have the last word, since you are you have your eyes inside right now.
Well, I think that Jillian framed it perfectly, and without mincing words, without any confusion, we know what will happen in January if we do set amount of members in one chamber to sustain Governor Cooper's veto. But aside from that, we need to make sure that we know who the pro-choice candidates are. And then we need to help resource them. And as Sarah said, we have to make sure that we are working for them, knocking those doors and making those phone calls and making sure, as we heard from Joe, that people are educated about this issue and they understand what is on the line. Because if we don't do it in November, then we know what we have to face in January.
Thank you very much. With that, I think I will thank all of the panelists for their contributions to today. Truly appreciated. To our audience members, I don't know, Ava, if you can put up the slide. We have resources for further education, which, as Joe and all of the panelists told us, is important. But you also have the League of Women Voters. You have Lillian's List. We've got a number of other places that you can go to figure out how you should vote. And importantly, as we've heard, not just vote, knock on doors, phone bank, that sort of thing, if this is important. And I think Joe, in one of our conversations over email, said, vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. So I thank the panelists for this information. I encourage our audience members to go to these links, to go to Lillian's List, to go to the League of Women Voters, to access information at Planned Parenthood of the South Atlantic. And if you're able to vote in the 4th Congressional District in North Carolina, that you lend your support for someone who obviously is pro-choice, pro-bodily autonomy, and respects all human rights. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, audience. We look forward to seeing all of you at a future Lunch and Learn right here on Zoom over Facebook Live. So thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you.